Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean. Today I'm doing a quick book haul, so let's get into it. Beginning with actually a couple of my own books. So just in the mail the other day I got, first let's do this one, Autumn and Destiny. This is the fourth book in the Trevor Knight series. And so I'm currently editing this book. This will be the seventh and projected final draft of this book. So I'm going to edit it once more with a red pen and then publish it. Presumably, possibly aiming for like a September-ish publication date, but we will see. It could always be later if I just don't get around to it or if I have troubles with it or whatever. But kind of aiming for around September, maybe publish it. It's a big book. It's just about 600 pages. So that's insane. That's my biggest book to date. And I will probably do an editing explained video for this book once I finish doing all the edits. Also in the mail a couple days ago, I got this, which will be the fifth draft of Arabian Dawn, which is the fifth book in the Trevor Knight series, the sequel to the book I just showed you, Autumn and Destiny. So this book is not as long. It's just about 450 pages. And I actually really like this. So this might be my favorite book I have written so far. I don't know, I just really like the characters and just, I don't know, just everything about the book. I like it. I think it's my best book so far. I really like the relationship between the characters, though. There's kind of the three main characters. There's Trevor Knight, the main character. There's Mora Fox, who is kind of his love interest. And then there's the prince slash soon to be crown prince slash likely future king of Saudi Arabia. And just the relationship between Trevor Knight and that prince. His name is Asajala. Baby. I don't know, I just really like it. Just like for his character growth and everything. And also it's in Saudi Arabia, which is the last place Trevor Knight should go because he's had so many problems everywhere he's gone, and he's just, had problems with like the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS and everything. Now he's going to Saudi Arabia, and he doesn't really like a lot of Saudi Arabia because that's like the heart of the Muslim world, and all the things he doesn't like about Islam, like the ways they treat their women and stuff. So this is the last place he should go. But he actually forms kind of a real deep friendship with the Saudi prince, just like a real unexpected friendship. So I just really like this book. So this will be the fifth draft edits of the book. I really look forward to doing that, but I will probably not get around to editing this until a little bit later in the year, because what I was doing like the past year, I had three books that I was currently editing, and as a result, I just wasn't really editing. I'd kind of look at my stack of books needing to be edited, and I wouldn't do any of them because I couldn't decide on what to do. So I'm kind of have gone down to just working on one book at a time. So right now I'm actually working on a different book, which I'll actually show you guys here. It's the fourth draft of Keeping Fire, which is the third book in the Samuel Creed series. This is the fourth draft, so I'm editing it, and it's a mess. I mean, there's a lot of edits I am making to this book. So this is kind of more have my full attention lately. And this book is like taking a lot of my time just because it's a real difficult book for me to work on. Just a lot of, kind of violent stuff happens, and, there's a lot of edits I'm making to the book. So this is taking me a while, and I'm not even, I'm about a quarter way into it. But this will probably take me, a month or two more at least to do it. So yeah, it'll take me a while to get to those other books. But anyway, let's get more to the books I actually got, the new books for me. So beginning with a signed one, it is The Waterworks, signed by E.L. Doctorow. E.L. Doctorow is on the top 1000 book for a book called... Ooh, what's it called? E.L. Doctorow. I better check. Oh, Ragtime. So I tried reading that book, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago or so, and I just didn't really like it. But it's a top 1000 book, a top 1000 author. I don't know if I mentioned the book, Top 1000 list by James Mustich. So anyway, I've seen this book at a bookstore for, at least a couple of years, I think. And, I've been tempted to get it because it's a top 1000 author, but I haven't gotten it in 2 years. I've risked it being sold for that long, just because I didn't really like the book Ragtime too much, and I just didn't really care. But kind of the longer it went on, this is the only signed book we have by this author, and I like it because it's a specific signed edition book, so it's a legitimate autograph. So finally I just kind of decided, I don't really want this book to sell. So I got it and I paid exactly nothing for it. I just traded in some of my books I've already read, unsigned books, and swapped it for this one. So, I've wanted it for a couple of years. So I finally just traded in some books and got it for free. So that's a good price for it. I figure I might try reading it at some point. And also with the book Ragtime, since I don't really recall too much what I thought about it, except that I didn't like it, that is a book I would consider trying to read again at some point. Because maybe when I tried reading it the last time, maybe I just wasn't in the right emotional state to read it. Maybe like as a judge, I wasn't as good a judge on reading the writing or whatever. So it is a book I would consider picking up again, or potentially just any other E.L. Doctorow book. Especially now that I have a signed book by him, I'll kind of want to like and appreciate him more because I'll want to be glad that I got a signed book by him because, it'd be better if I thought like, dude, this is one of the better writers of all time and I got a signed book by him. That would be cool rather than just having a signed book and just thinking, oh, I don't like that author at all, Why have the signed book in that case? But I got it for free. So anyway, I will be open to reading another E.L. Doctorow book, but really, really low priority. I may never get around to it. Next, this is a book that came in and the bookstore owner wanted to take it, so he's just going to donate this. So I just pulled it out of the donation pile and was just like, oh, I'll take that. But it's Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I have a signed book by him. I think it's, where is it? Anyway, a signed book by him somewhere. Right down there, Larry McMurtry. Somebody's Darling. So a signed book by the author of Lonesome Dove. So I began reading this book like 5 years ago. I kind of had a little bit low expectations because it's a real long book and I'm not really a fan of Westerns too much. But reading it, I really like it. I really like the writing. It's just a real kind of simply beautiful writing style. It's not overdone at all, but it has just the perfect mix of description and characterization and plotting and world building and everything. It's just like a real well fleshed out world. And even if not a whole lot is happening, like all that may happen is just like people sitting around a table eating stew or something. But it's still interesting. I just really like his writing. So I think he's a good writer and I really like this book, but I've been reading it off and on for years and just occasionally picking it up from the library and reading a chapter and then holding on to it for a week and then returning it and then getting it like 4 or 5 or 7 months later and reading another chapter. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure where I'm at, but I'll find it pretty easy. And I don't know exactly when I'll try reading it again because I have several long books that I'm actually currently in the middle of reading. Like one of them is Rebecca West. What's the name of the book? Oh, it's Black Lamb and Gray Falcon. I'm kind of currently in the middle of reading that. I'm also currently in the middle of reading The Caine Mutiny by Herman Wouk, and I've kind of put those books aside just because I'm trying to read other things. So this is one of the books I'm currently middle way through, Lonesome Dove. So I'll get around to it eventually. It's definitely not a DNF yet. I'd like to keep reading it and hopefully finish the book. It's just so long and I just can't really waste too much of my time. There's other books I want to read and so on. So yeah, I do like it though. So it's definitely going to be a recommended read. Even if I do wind up finally just DNFing the book, it's still going to be a recommended read because I do really like the writing. It is one of the more beautifully written books I've ever read. So I think it's all in all a great book in spite of its length and the fact that I just read it so sporadically. It's still a real good book and a major accomplishment to write such a long book, and be such a good book. So definitely a, accomplishment, an achievement. Next, I saw this book while moving books because at the bookstore I've been like moving books a whole lot for the last couple of years. But I saw this book and we must have had it for a while, but I've never noticed it. And maybe because it was like on the very top shelf, but it's still crazy I haven't noticed it because there's a sign sticker on it. So I don't know why I haven't noticed this. And this is in fact an author I have been looking for and hoping to get just because like I don't know exactly how I found this author's name, but I must have been reading about, other books on like Wikipedia and it mentioned this author and it was an author I saw at the bookstore. I saw his books at the bookstore, but I didn't know who that was. And then when I read the Wikipedia article on that guy, I realized he was actually a real prominent author in his time. But anyway, it's a signed book and other stories signed by John O'Hara. So, to me, I was like, John O'Hara, I don't have a clue who that is. But working in the bookstore, I saw several of his books. So basically, John O'Hara was one of the bigger writers around the time of Ernest Hemingway. So John O'Hara might have, in fact, potentially even sold more books at the time than Hemingway. He might have been a bigger author than Hemingway. I don't know if that's exactly true, but he was definitely one of the more popular authors at the time. And the thing with him is he's not really remembered today. And in fact, he was kind of began to get forgotten. Oh man, my grammar was so bad there. During his own time, because apparently what this guy did is he wrote so many books and published so much and so often that people kind of grew tired of all of his books just because it'd always be like there's a new John O'Hara book out. And I think he kind of wrote a little bit more of like shorter stories, but he was always coming out with another short story, just real prolific author. And as a result, people kind of lost interest in him because it's like, oh, yep, another John O'Hara book. I'm not going to read it. I don't have time. And so the author I would really compare him to would be like James Patterson, where it's always like every day there's a new James Patterson book on the shelf. And it's just like, are people really buying those or are they just on the shelf because it's James Patterson? And, he's probably one of the more in stock authors that you would ever find. I mean, there's tons of James Patterson books everywhere, but he's probably not like the best writer around. I mean, I think the best writer in the United States, I'd guess, would be like Stephen King. So I think that's kind of how it would kind of be related. Like, Ernest Hemingway was the Stephen King of his time, and John O'Hara was the James Patterson of his time. And as a result, John O'Hara kind of slipped into obscurity. But I think it's really interesting that in his time, he was one of the bigger authors. So I think it's kind of cool to have a signed book by, the best-selling author or whatever, or one of the best-selling authors in the time of Hemingway, just to kind of be in that era. So like people who would have read Hemingway in at the time or whatever, and Hemingway himself, they would have all known John O'Hara. So I think that's just kind of cool. And, I've never read him. I don't think this is, one of his more prominent books, but still a signed book by him. And I do plan to try to read it at some point. I think John O'Hara's writing, I think he kind of focused on like a lot of alcoholic characters and kind of just, down on his luck men and, just kind of struggling and just trying to get through life and, just things not really working out too well. And that's kind of what John O'Hara, focused on. And I think he may have also written some things that were kind of a little bit scandalous. I don't know exactly, like just dealing with the sexuality of his characters or whatever, just having alcoholic characters. So he's kind of a, gruff, tough, author, if that makes sense. And it kind of fits in the vein with like Ernest Hemingway and Norman Mailer and stuff. A lot of these writers in this time were kind of like championing like the losers in a way. Like their characters were alcoholics. They weren't like, real virtuous, heroic people. They wrote about, people whose lives were kind of destroyed, maybe largely because of themselves and just kind of, them struggling with that and so on. So I don't know. I don't really think I like that too much. I've tried reading a few Ernest Hemingway books. I really didn't like him. I don't like Norman Mailer's personality. I just don't really like that focus on that kind of character or whatever. And I think these authors kind of tried to almost emulate their characters. Like they kind of wanted to be known as alcoholic guys who kind of swore. They weren't really the most noble, virtuous guys. They were kind of like, the bad dude at the time, the bad character, kind of like the rebel. That's kind of what a lot of these writers and stuff were embracing. Hemingway, John O'Hara, Norman Mailer. They were being like the bad boy of their time. And I don't know, I just don't really like them. But I'm super glad to have this. So this is the only book on this whole list today, except for one that I paid for. So I paid a grand total of $10 for this book. So I'm definitely happy with that. Next, I've seen this author's books at the bookstore quite a bit, and I forget why exactly. Oh, I think because I saw like signed books by this author at the bookstore. So I kind of looked him up because I was like, should I buy this or not? And I saw that the author actually lives in Mount Vernon, which is like, my hometown. That's where I live. And so I mentioned to the bookstore owner, like, hey, do you know this guy? And he's like, oh yeah, he comes into the bookstore every now and then. So I was like, I wonder if I've ever met this dude coming into the bookstore or not. I think he said he hasn't been into the bookstore for a while. But for like the last year or so, I've kind of been wondering, is this guy ever going to come in? And I'd kind of mentioned to the bookstore owner, like, hey, let me know if this guy comes in. I'd kind of like to meet him. Even though I've never read any of his books yet, he's an author and I've never met him. But just recently I've been kind of thinking, in case this guy does happen to come in, I'd kind of like to know his books. So I thought of getting one of his books, and so this is kind of his more notable book. But anyway, it is Knight Errant by R. Garcia E. Robertson. So yeah, local author. He lives in this town, Mount Vernon, and comes into the bookstore. I don't know if I have met him. Oh, I should look. Nope, no picture. Bummer. But yeah, so anyway, this is kind of, I think, his best known work, and it's signed. So why not? I think it's like a fantasy book. Not really my type of genre, but I don't know. Try giving it a try. See how it goes. I don't know exactly how high it is for a priority. We'll see. Maybe I'll try to slip it in this year sometime to my read list. But yeah, I'm glad to have it just because, local author, signed book, and also kind of his most famous book. So yeah, Next, not a signed book. I don't know exactly how I found out about this book, but it would have been by browsing Wikipedia. And anyway, so it is Orhan Pamuk. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. But basically, what I saw on Wikipedia is that this author is kind of like one of, if not the biggest Turkish writers. And this guy apparently got into trouble. The Turkish government does not really like this dude because I think he has been pretty critical of some things Turkey has done or the Turkish government has done. So he has kind of been public enemy number one. And I think for a while he had to leave the country, but I think he might have been allowed to go back to Turkey because I think he is kind of so famous that the Turkish government is kind of afraid to go after him because he is kind of like their best writer, I guess. So if they were to go after him, they would just look really bad and make this guy into a martyr. So I don't really know anything about him otherwise. I don't know anything about his books, except I think this is one of his better known books, Snow. So yeah, the one book I showed you, Autumn and Destiny, that's definitely a book where I kind of expect it to get banned in Turkey if they ever found out about it. It's really kind of a middle finger to Turkey and the Turkish president. So because of that, I kind of like Bird. I kind of relate with this guy because we're both kind of, we both have some harsh words to say for Turkey. So anyway, curious to give it a try. Oh, I just saw something there that, oh, it's like real small print for a section. I might just wind up skipping that. Man, this book is kind of weird. There's like different fonts occasionally in the book. Not too many, but anyway, kind of a weird looking book in, parts. But anyway, gonna give it a try at some point. Orhan Pamuk, Snow. I did look for a signed book by this guy, but we didn't have any, which is unfortunate. But yeah, gonna give it a try at some point. Last of all, except for the $10 John O'Hara book, this is the only book on the list I have paid for. And I got this book on Amazon because I've been always looking for this book at the bookstore. It's kind of the main book I want to read by this author. In fact, I'm currently reading a book by this author, Stranger in a Strange Land. But it is Robert A. Heinlein, Starship Troopers. And kind of one issue I have with Stranger in a Strange Land, kind of the main issue really, is it's a long book and it's just kind of taking me a while. And this book doesn't look very long. I mean, the font is kind of a pretty decent size and it's only 270 pages. So it looks like it should actually be a fairly simple book to read. But anyway, so yeah, Starship Troopers, of course, they made the movie or several movies about it. And something I love is that Paul Verhoeven, whatever his name is, he's also the guy who directed RoboCop. He's the guy who directed Starship Troopers. He said that he tried to read the book Starship Troopers and he got bored like halfway through or less than halfway through and just made up the rest of the movie based on however he wanted it to go, which I just think is pretty hilarious that, the director of Starship Troopers was like, yeah, I tried reading the book, but it was just boring. So I just made the whole movie up myself, kind of. So I just love that, even as a writer, I think that's kind of like, ooh, how could you, how could you, twist someone's book like that and just ignore their book? But there's definitely books where I think authors or directors are right to kind of change, the book. So I think that's kind of funny, just that, the director is like, I got bored with it, so I just made up the whole movie myself. But I want to see how it goes. I do definitely like the film Starship Troopers. And the reason why is because it's basically like a post 9/11 satire, but they made the movie before 9/11. So I don't know, it's just real funny to me. and quite relevant and everything. And I know this book is pretty controversial and like a lot of people don't like it because apparently what Robert A. Heinlein was doing was, I'm not sure exactly, but I think, you know, there was a lot of the like anti-government and anti-war protests and stuff going around. And Heinlein really wanted to emphasize like patriotism and, you know, serving your country and all that. So I think he wrote this book to kind of, you know, encourage, you know, young adults and young men and stuff to be like disciplined, orderly, you know, members of society and to, you know, sacrifice for the government or whatever and to, you know, have a higher calling and all that. But Verhoeven or whatever his name is, he chose to kind of turn it into a satire and make fun of it. Whereas I think Heinlein was actually kind of saying with like all the like discipline stuff in the book that he was kind of encouraging that. He was like, you know, this is kind of what our country needs. This is what our world needs is to be more disciplined. And in the film, they kind of just satirize that and spoof it. Uh, so yeah, I'm curious to see how it goes. I think Verhoeven, I don't know about his pronunciation of his name. He said that something he didn't like about the book is so much of it is just like lectures in the classroom about, you know, discipline and stuff, and it was just boring. But I'm going to be curious to read it just to see how it compares with the movie and, you know, whether they were right to change the things for the film. I would imagine they probably were right to change, you know, the film just to make it a more entertaining film than whatever the book is. But at the same time, you know, I'm kind of hopeful that the book still has value because of it, just because it'll be so different from the film. So curious to give it a read. Really, you know, kind of excited about it. It's kind of my main Robert Heinlein book I want to read. So yeah, I bought it off Amazon because we don't have it at the bookstore. Anyway, I'm sorry for rambling so much in this video. I just felt like rambling today. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. Sorry for my rambling, but yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Hope to see you in another video. Bye.
2, 3, 4.